Okay. Alain, over to you to introduce a bit and then start the presentation. And let me know if you have troubles with sharing. I can also share from my end.
Works.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. You're introducing or I am?
No, you are.
Okay, okay. So my name is Alain Alameddin. You can pronounce it however you like. Alan works. So this is the title of today's discussion. How do we liberate Palestine? What are actionable steps allies can take to affect the balance of power? So the first part is going to be me giving this presentation, and the second part will be a discussion between us in attendance. Juliette, shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
All right. So there are three steps, as you can see in the picture. The first is to define the target. So in this picture, there are two targets. The arrow thrower needs to pick one, otherwise, they're hitting the wrong target. The second step is to aim correctly at the target we've set. And the third is to build the power, otherwise we're shooting in the right direction, but not far enough. So first, setting the target. So if the root problem is the existence of the satellite in mind, then the problem is not Netanyahu, it's not the present government. The root problem is not the 23-25 episode of the genocide. The root problem is not the violent or apartheid policies of the settler state. It's the existence of the settler state itself. If we agree that this is the root problem, then obviously the solution is the antithesis to the settler state. So not a state that grants or denies rights on the basis of identity, not a state that imposes foreign hegemony. So it's a democratic and Palestinian state. This is how we understand the target to be. Now, some think this is not the time to set the target. We disagree because with an incorrect target, we will aim incorrectly. So just like in the picture we saw. So I'll give a few examples. If the aim is two states, then divesting from the West Bank to 48 occupied Palestine is a victory. If the aim is one democratic state, then it's not a victory, it's part of the defeat. Then resistance is a problem. If our focus is on peace, then when Hamas or Hezbollah resists, that's not peace. If the aim is a dignified life, then moving Palestinians from Gaza to somewhere else is a solution. Whereas if the aim is
Um, Rada, Rada, can you mute yourself? Okay.
you have a mute all.
I would like not to use it. Can you please mute yourself, everyone, just as long as the presentation is going on? Be great. Go ahead, Alain.
I'd rather wait until everyone mutes themselves so we don't interrupt going forward. Okay, so if the aim is a dignified life, then moving Palestinians from Gaza to somewhere else becomes a solution. If the aim is to stop this government, then participating in Knesset elections are a solution. So, as you can see, the target is not something that we set later on. It's a target that we set from the beginning on. Now, one question is, won't it create divide? Because if we open up the topic of what our objective is, then some are going to object and say, no, but two states is good. just removing apartheid from within Israel is good. It opens up a conversation and different points of view. And for this reason, some postpone setting the target. Now, the reality is that we are already divided. Different Palestinian groups view things differently. Different allies also view things differently. And we see this all the time. So, for example, at the fall of Assad, we had Palestinians thinking this is part of liberation, and Palestinians thinking that this is part of the defeat because the axis of resistance lost a member. And there were other points of view. With Mamdani, it's the same. Some say that his victory, his election was a victory for the Palestinian cause. And some say that it's part of normalization and of losing the Palestinian discourse in liberal white discourse. No Other Land is a movie that some viewed as co-resistance and others viewed as normalization. So we are already divided. And this is absolutely normal. First, because no society is politically homogeneous. All societies have different points of view. This is even worse in the case of Palestine because of the diaspora and the fragmentation of Palestinian society, really across the globe. And under occupation, it's even more normal. So if you take all of the countries that were under occupation, for example, in Algeria, there was the Resistance Front, and there was the Bani Wiwi. In Vietnam, there was North Vietnam and South Vietnam. In France, there was Vichy and De Gaulle, and so on. So others are free to set their target. If all they want to do is remove apartheid from within Israel, that's their target. But you must set yours. So there's no going, we cannot skip setting the target. And if we agree on the target of one democratic Palestinian state, now we need to aim correctly. So how do we know the kind of aiming that actually reaches the target? This requires a little analysis. If we take a look at current efforts, they generally lack a target. So most of the time, if you ask people in solidarity in Europe or North America what the goal is, they will say something like stopping the genocide, so an immediate goal, but they will generally not have a long-term target. This said, there are a number of actions that are taken. One of them is displays of numbers. So letter writing, Twitter storms, demonstrations, these show that there is a certain number of people uh, in some way. Generally, it's tied to divestment and sanctions. So, for example, there will be a march in, for example, Paris, calling for France to no longer send weapons to the colony. Now, here there's an important question. What is the purpose? If the purpose of these displays of number is to affect political decisions in capitalist countries, uh, the policymakers don't really give much importance to the number of people. They give more importance to what the capital owners think. I'll give an example. If you take a key legislation in the US to have less weapons among civilians, you will find support of 70 to 95% among both parties, among independents, among the population of such legislation. So, for example, of having tougher restrictions to grant people the right to bear, for example, machine guns. This has been the case for decades, but because the capital owners, like the National Rifle Agency, uh, do not want these policies to happen, they don't happen. We could say the same about sending weapons to the colony. For example, in the UK, most members of both main parties oppose sending weapons to the colonies as long as the genocide is happening. But when we had the elections there 2 years ago, the main candidates did not oppose this. The same happened in the US. So if the purpose of a display of number is to affect political decisions, it's kind of not that effective. On the other hand, it can impose a narrative. So if there is a march of, I don't know, 10,000 people in Berlin saying we don't want a state that discriminates on the basis of who's Jewish, who's not. We've tried this with Nazism and it was not a good idea. We want a state where everyone are equal citizens. It won't affect the political decisions, but it will impose a discourse. And now the Zionists have to say, no, we want a state that's not democratic. So it's a narrative victory. So this is regarding the display of numbers. Regarding boycotting, so boycott is passive in nature, which is not a bad thing per se, but boycott is something that I do not do. Instead of eating this or buying this, I will eat that or buy that. It can be organized to become active. So we can think of what it is that causes people or groups or states not to boycott. We can present alternatives to the what we are trying to boycott. So this is a move from passive to active that can happen. Current efforts being done, a lot of it is debating Zionists to convince them. To be honest, that's not very effective. The percentage of Zionists who will be convinced is probably less than 1 in 1,000. And all of these efforts that's being put to convince them, they probably can be put elsewhere. And we're going to discuss alternatives. Uh, Other current efforts are direct action to physically stop the production and flow of weapons. So, for example, in the Czech Republic, they burned down the Elbit factory last week. The Italian dock workers refused to ship weapons to the colony. This is very effective. And the last one here is narrative pushback. So when anti-Zionist Jews say not in our name, they are challenging the legitimacy or claimed legitimacy of Zionism. Because if Zionism doesn't speak in Jews' name, then why does it exist? Its whole justification is that it represents Jews. So this is a look at current efforts. Um, we really must wonder how we can analyze the efficiency of efforts. So how do we know where to aim? The political landscape is made of different actors. So states, armed militias, the media, the armament industries, other capitalists, international institutions, and so on. Each uses different means of pressure, so weapons, money, etc. The media, control over, Twitter, and they make decisions based on their power and their estimates of others' power. The total sum of these dynamics is the balance of power, and this balance is what we need to identify. So in the drawing on the right, the actual drawing is taken from something completely different, but it's an illustration of how we have different actors who are all interconnected in terms of alliances working together, working against each other, killing each other. This creates a network of power. This is what we need to affect. Letter writing falls outside of this generally. A convincing Zionist also falls outside of this. But this is what we need to identify. So what is the balance of power that sustains the colony? We put 8 points here. One, it controls the narrative. So let me give an example. On October 7th, the colony said that Hamas burned babies in ovens, and it's spread that narrative. They did not. They were not trying to convince people that Hamas actually did that. Because, first of all, it really doesn't make sense that I'm a resistance fighter. I'm back on my land that's originally mine. I'm fighting one of the strongest armies in the world. And I say, wait a minute, I need to pick up a baby, put him in the oven, and turn on the oven. It makes absolutely no sense. And they offered no evidence. They knew they weren't going to convince anyone that the Palestinian resistance actually did this. But what happened is that allies responded to that, saying, no, the Palestinian resistance did not do that. And so they used the frame of discussion where that was imposed by the colony, where the actions of Palestinians were the reference. So now the Palestinians are the question mark, not the occupation. So this is one way in which the colony controls the narrative. They have economic and technological relations in Palestine and globally. So, for example, this is one reason why Gulf countries are generally with the colony, either they have normalized or they are normalizing. For example, the desalination technology there that's crucial for the states. Israel is a big part of it. They have alliances with capital in the US and Europe, including the armament industry that they call the defense industry as part of the control over the narrative. There are colonial international institutions like the UN, the ICC, the ICJ, and that they've managed to impose this as something neutral and even something that Palestinians can look for liberation, can look to for liberation. They benefit from the lack of democracy in the US, Europe, Russia, China, and Arab countries, like what I've described, the very small effect that demonstrations or popular will has had on these governments. They benefit from identitarian fragmentation in Arab societies. So, for example, now in Lebanon, the whole discussion is about Hezbollah being Shiite instead of it being, a political discussion about the right of Lebanon in the face of its enemy. They benefit from depoliticized and unorganized societies worldwide. So, we were saying that setting the target is step one, but actually most people, most groups aren't even there. When we talk about, setting the target, they refuse to set the target. It's part of depoliticizing identity as part of the capitalist and neoliberal trend, where we only focus on the immediate, not on the trajectory. And when it comes to unorganized, well, many of the actions taken by allied or not allies are not coordinated with Palestinians in Palestine and even not coordinated among themselves. Often it's hearsay. We will have a WhatsApp discussion where someone will suggest something or someone will post a tweet and say something like, do that. But who are you talking to? What is the organized frame where we can make proposed plans, agree on plans, and implement them? Generally, it doesn't exist. And of course, weaponry. So this is kind of, to go back to this picture, the one on the right, this is kind of the balance of power that that sustains the colony. And this is what we need to target. So there are three kinds of efforts that we're going to propose in terms of targeting. One is to impose a Jewish state or a democratic state as the key narrative. So to go back to the example of what happened on October 7th, the question that they tried to impose was, did the Palestinian resistance rape women? Did they burn children alive? Did they kill civilians? Do they have the right to do that? And the reality is that the real question is, should there be a Jewish state or not? Because even if they did kill children, then that would mean that, the people who did this are criminals, but it doesn't justify the occupation in any way. So we need to enforce our narrative. In Palestine, there's going to be a state, a Jewish one or a democratic one. Uh, we can put actual efforts in this, help others the target. This can delegitimize Zionism because it forces it to say, we do not want one democratic state, which is a losing statement for them. And it's a strategic narrative victory for us. But this is counter-hegemonic, so it implies confrontation. It means that all of us on the call, if we're going to play that role, we're going to face Palestinians and allies who, because they are depoliticized or because they have different targets, are going to oppose this. So it's actually warfare. This is why they're called efforts, and liberating Palestine requires confrontation. This is part of the confrontation, imposing that narrative, a Jewish state or a democratic state. A second kind of efforts, we can clearly put the fight for a democratic state in Palestine within the frame of the fight for democratic states at home. So here we put two suggestions, two axes of discourse. The first is that politicizing identity fragments societies worldwide. An example that I often give, in Palestine, they propose a two-state problem because they say, Jews are different from Palestinians and states should be identitarian. And so we should have one Jewish state and one Palestinian state. There were polls in the US 4 years ago where 45% of US voters said that it's time to split the US in two, depending on who's pro-life and who's pro-choice. So it's a two-state problem, but the model is now applied to the US. So the identitarian basis of Zionism and of colonialism in general is fragmenting those societies. In Europe, we can see that not only the far right or the right is politicizing identities, but even the left. Oftentimes, the left is about a certain identity, about Muslims, about brown people, or so on. And we can see the left even proposing, people like Obama or Harris, who are part of the problem, but because they are black or brown, they become part of the solution. So this is how the identitarian vision is detrimental to societies back home. We're not talking about solidarity with Palestine, but about a problem that you have back home. The second example, the second axis is capital. So it's ethnically raising Palestine and it is stealing democratic representation back home, like what I just mentioned about how main candidates and political parties and decision makers really don't care what the people think because they are following capital, Zionist lobbies, armament industries, media, and so on. So this is one thing that should happen instead of feeling sympathy toward people who are dying, speaking of an actual political project that includes Palestine as part of your country's foreign policy, but also includes your problem that you are facing because you are in non-democratic states. A third kind of efforts that can be made abroad is to work to politicize and organize efforts. So in terms of politicization, we can learn key political concepts to understand how society functions and how it can be changed. So what we're discussing is part of this. We can develop the critical capacity to counter the hegemonic discourse and analyze the balance of power. So learning concept and developing critical capacity. And there are also actual projects that the initiative has worked on and is working on at these levels. This will help us move from advocacy, which is, just talk, descendants keep talking about Palestine or all eyes on Rafah, which accomplishes nothing, it's just talking. We can move from this to affecting the balance of power. We can connect with Palestinian movements that are global, not regional or local. So actual Palestinian movements that include Palestine and the Palestinian diaspora. We can create frameworks and build structures to coordinate efforts. So all of this requires work, but they are targets set, there are efforts set on the target. Now, building the power. So how do we put this into action? How do we implement this? First, this requires dedicating regular time to political work. If if we're not able to dedicate regular time, it won't accomplish it. With this in mind, we have several projects to propose. One is an online ODS campaign. We tried sending it before, it didn't work because of this. We had too few people dedicating regular time to political work. So we can reply to people discussing ODS on Twitter. There are people talking about ODS on Twitter every day, several persons a day. We can engage with high following posts on Twitter or Instagram. We can join Facebook groups that are relevant to Palestine and share content there. We can be present on Reddit, including sharing our content on the Palestine sub there, which bans the initiative. So if this is a project you want to work on, reach out so we can organize this. The second project is an ODS outreach campaign. There are thousands of pro-Palestinian groups and influential individuals that we can reach out to, and we can discuss with them why it's crucial to center the narrative on ODS. This includes political parties, reporters, podcasters, influencers, workers' union, anti-Zionist Jewish groups, student groups. So again, reach out so we can organize this. Project 3 is expanding not in our name. So anti-Zionist Jewish groups challenge Zionism's legitimacy. They can go on the offensive. So imagine adopting a definition of anti-Semitism that explicitly recognizes the right to challenge the existence of a Jewish state, provided it's done on political grounds, not identitarian grounds. And imagine they then reach out to Jewish groups to adopt such a definition. Also, many of them speak of Palestinian self-determination, But Palestinian self-determination means determining what happens with all their land. So it means one Palestinian state over all of Palestine. So why not say it explicitly if this is what they have in mind? This is a step forward in expanding, not in our name. And of course, the wording can be negotiated as long as it's within the frame of challenging the existence of a Jewish state. Project 4 is reverse migration offices. So we know that the colony facilitates the migration to Palestine, and so the settler colonization of Palestine. We can do the opposite. So decolonization offices, if you like. We can establish offices that help Israelis leave Palestine, that grant them legal help with migration and naturalization, practical help with language, finding a house, work, and so imagine if an Israeli who wants to leave Palestine for whatever reason can see a map with schools or synagogues that are relevant to them in areas they search in. Or imagine if, I don't know, they have a German grandfather and there's a lawyer helping them gain German citizenship free of charge, or something like that. So there already are preliminary studies on this. We just need people to carry the project forward. Project 5 is a global coordination platform. So today, as I was saying, much efforts are discussed through individual connections or they are disconnected from Palestine. So there will be a group, I don't know, in Portland discussing something. They have friends in California, and so they'll do something together. But we can establish a coordination platform that allows Palestinian groups and allied groups to share projects. So we would need to first build the infrastructure, we would need to reach out to these groups to invite them to join, and we would need to manage the platform. Again, the preliminary studies are there. We just need people to carry the project. Again, this requires dedicating regular time to political work. So this is my presentation. Now, the question is yours. In what direction do you want to build the strength?
Thanks, Alain. Maybe before opening the floor to everyone, just wanted to say, so the idea of this discussion, of course, open questions and feedback and reactions are welcome, but we would also like to focus on the different projects and what we can do. What we can do individually as groups as well. So I will put again the 5 projects in the chat as kind of a reminder, and then I would like to hear from you on what among these actions, what are you already engaging in or would like to engage in? What are the challenges that you see? What do you think we should do more? So if you can comment a bit more on this. Um, while I put this on the chat and the conversation starts on there, so there were already some comments in the chat. There is a question from Les, I'm not sure if it's the right name, about what should be the BDS campaign do more. I don't know if so after that, the rest of the presentation already gave you idea, and if you can comment a bit more what you think the BDS campaign could do more, and Alan can of course also jump in, and anyone else who has suggestions. I I don't know if the person can hear us.
Are you suggesting I speak now? No,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't. Or are you going on to the next speaker?
No, I was asking if you can, like, if now with the end of the presentation you have a bit more idea, or if
Okay.
like what are your thoughts now? What do you think that the campaign could do more?
Okay. Well, I'll wait for the other presentations.
There is no other presentation. It's
Oh,
only
okay.
conversation now.
Okay. Yes. Well, increasingly the BDS campaign and the movement in general has taken up the slogan, we are all Palestinians, which is, of course, meant as an analogy because we are increasingly demonized by our own regimes in ways analogous to the attacks on Palestinians. So we increasingly understand how the Western imperialist states are suppressing our protest by incorporating some of the same so-called security measures that have been developed for decades against Palestinians. So this gives us even more reasons to revolt against our regime's support for the Israeli regime. And this matters for the BDS campaign because we're having to defend our BDS actions against far more than false allegations of anti-Semitism. We're having to defend it increasingly against criminalization strategies, which come partly from the colonial strategies that have been used by imperialist countries for a long time, and especially in the Palestine laboratory. So that's one way I would answer my question, is that the movement is already making that connection.
Thanks. Thanks. That's actually a great point. I think, Alain, do you have any reaction to this in the sense of like, what do you think groups that are very visible and tend to be criminalized, how can they best engage with us?
Well, it's related to how we engage with our own state. The two go together. Anyway, I'll wait for the speakers. Yeah.
No, I really like what Juliette did, asking the question back, and I'm happy if this is a discussion between all of us, where I'm just one of those discussing rather than a Q&A. But I'm fine with Q&A if that's what what you guys want. I think I'd like to say two things. First, what could BDS do? Well, adopt ODS. Because again, this was my very first slide. If we agree that the existence of the settler state is the problem, then let's just say it. It's not just its regime. Like I have a problem with, for example, the Syrian regime, or the Iranian regime, or the Lebanese regime, but I don't have a problem with the existence of the Syrian state because it's Syria, it's Syrian society, and there's a Syrian state. In Palestine, we don't have a Palestinian state; we have an Israeli state. So it's not just the regime. The actions of Lebanon toward Palestinians, some have suggested that it is apartheid. So yeah, this needs to be dismantled. It's part of my political work in Lebanon to dismantle this apartheid. But I have a problem with the regime, not with the existence of a Lebanese state. So yes, can be very clear about this, that there's no justification for the existence of a Jewish settler state, and it should be a democratic one. To answer that sub-question directly that you just also repeated, Juliette, groups that are already facing difficulties, one of the things that help is actually ODS. Because when we say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, we're describing a geographic region. That the Zionists, they say the same. They also say from the river to the sea. But we're not saying what we want to see there. And because we are standing in opposition to Zionism that basically says we want, no Palestinians between the river and the sea, it's very easy for others to infer that we're saying we don't want Jews between the river and the sea. So the solution is not to back off from the river to the sea. The solution is to clarify. Just like the leaders of the resistance have said and repeated, a countless number of times, we have absolutely no problem with a Jewish person living there. We have a problem with Jewish hegemony, with a Jewish state. So actually clarifying that we want a state that does not discriminate shields you from problem. It doesn't create more problems, more legal problems.
Oh, thank you. Can I say something at this point?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Look, I have a confession. After a very people know how hard I've worked over the years in terms of the aim of a democratic state and so on and so forth. Now, there is something, though, that I have become convinced of, which is that we need to, how can I put this? the real problem here is the existence of Israel. That is the problem. That's what's holding everything up. That is what is causing these horrendous problems, the military attacks, the oppression of people, the ethnic cleansing, all the rest of it. It's the existence of the state of Israel. Now, Alain put it very well just now. I totally agree with him. This state has to be dismantled. It really does. And, I would say that it has to be dismantled as the aim of the campaign. You have to get rid of it because all the with the best wish in the world, all the work about putting forward alternatives to Israel, etc., is fine, but it doesn't solve the problem. If you define the problem as I do, which is that the existence of the state is the problem, that is the main problem. And I would argue that what we need is to focus our energies on dismantling the state. Now, you could say, well, that is, how do you propose to do that? And that would be a discussion, I think, worth having. We need to talk about what we can do individually with ideas or whatever to dismantle this state. Because I tell you something, while the state exists, with the amount of support that it receives from the formal order in all Western states, that this together is too strong. It's too strong to imagine trying to kind of get at it by lots of very good ideas like the democratic state, like et cetera, and BDS and all the rest of it. In the end, you cannot escape the fact that you need to dismantle the state. And my proposal is that we direct our energies and our creativeness to thinking of ways in which that is the aim. I don't have to convince anybody listening to this that if the state of Israel did not exist, a lot of these problems would disappear. And so we'd be talking about building what else can take its place, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So that is what I want to put into this discussion, because as you can see, I feel very strongly about it. And I think we cannot continue to evade this central issue.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for these ideas. And I think we can talk about it further. But before, I know that Ahmad, you already had put in the chat that you had a reaction. If you want to go ahead.
Sure thing. Hold on, actually, let me see if my camera works. I'd also like to turn it on. Oh, wait, okay, it doesn't work. I'll fix it later. So the comment that I had, it was, Alon, thank you for the presentation. It was on the slide where we were talking about, which wasn't, is it Not in Our Name, Anti-Zionist Jewish Narrative, that's number 3. The comment I had was, like from speaking to Jewish people, from speaking to Jewish Israelis, as someone who lives in the occupied territories, I noticed something, which is the Jewish people the Jewish people living here at least, and maybe to some extent in America, they don't understand that the active and insistent association between Jewishness and Judaism as a religion and the political entity that is Israel is actually causing more anti-Semitism. Now, this is maybe it's like putting a hat on a hat, but saying like not in our name is kind of not it's nonsensical. And I don't want to say nonsensical, like no, that's not the right word to use. But when the Jewish leader of the Jewish state sends Jewish militaries to do terrorism activities essentially in Gaza and in the West Bank and other places, there's no decoupling Jewishness from those actions. Now, why am I saying this? Is because I think, and this is the part where I speak to the project. I believe it is important to kind of frame it in such a way that it's not that anti-Semitism is not the same as anti-Zionism. It's more akin to like Judaism is inherently like anti-Zionism, or if you want something more aggressive, like Zionism as a political ideology is anti-Jewish. Um, but like maybe these things coming from a Muslim guy named Ahmad are gonna be, you know, not the I'm not the best messenger, but these are just my thoughts on the matter. The other thing I wanted to say whilst I have the floor is something like about the outreach campaign. Like I will reach out privately to Alon or to whichever, email address or something I need to reach out to. But I would like to contribute also to that project, like just because I have some background with like student organizing and I know some student groups and I also live here and I'm trying to understand more and more how the political situation works internally within the West Bank. I'm curious as to what ODS and also like people here in this Zoom meeting, I'm curious as to what they think about what the role is of an entity like the PA because I'm, obviously anyone who knows anything about the A is not a big fan. Okay? I'm not a big fan myself. Now, that said, uh, what was I saying? Now that said, it the idea that we can simply like ignore the PA's existence or not address it or not identify what we can do as Palestinians. PA is the Palestinian Authority, Christopher. Um, uh, if we as Palestinians we do not like living here, we don't know what we can do to kind of circumvent or at least work around the restrictions that are set by the PA, it's going to be difficult to connect whatever solidarity movement that we want to establish abroad because it's going to be like this very large network of decentralized groups that all kind of work together. But if we want to like link that to what Palestinians are saying on the ground, uh, I'm not sure. I think I'm gonna stop speaking. Um, but yeah, it's just something that I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
are you the
Thanks a lot.
same Ahmed I know? Sorry, Juliet.
No,
Yes,
no, go ahead.
it is indeed the same
تمام.
Ahmed,
Yeah.
أخبارك.
Great. Yeah, I was going to say that Alan put his contact in the chat also to continue this conversation. And if other people want to react or have ideas on both this aspect of the narrative around Jewishness and the work with the PA or other actors, go ahead. Hélène, I see that you have your hand raised.
Thank you. I guess I've had this discussion with Alan before, but I think you just cannot look at this whole situation without looking at it in terms of the worldwide interests of Western imperialists. I mean, Israel was created initially with the support of Britain, more or less taken over by the United States, and it is absolutely vital to the interests of the United States because the world still depends 80% on the use of fossil fuels for energy, and 79% of the resources of oil and gas are in the Middle East. And the United States and its Western allies have no other reliable source of power except Israel in the Middle East anymore. They used to have Iran. Saudi Arabia is not reliable anymore. And the competition with China is becoming greater and greater. And if Israel were to be weakened or destroyed or separated from the United States, then the whole power grip of the Western countries on controlling the trade and the refining and the sale and the dollar as currency, the whole world economic system whose control is still primarily in the West, although China's trying, would be destroyed. And, this explains why the United States attacked Iran, although they didn't really need to. But, Trump's a very stupid guy. But, ultimately, the reason they fear Iran is as a counter to Israel, which wasn't a realistic possibility right now. So that you can't talk about destroying Israel or attacking Israel without understanding that. The United States has no love of Jews. They certainly didn't help out Jews as such during World War II. They only are interested in Israel because of its economic and political importance to them. And they're just as happy to cooperate with Arabs and Palestinians. The United States would be very happy if Israel weren't so aggressive and, towards Gaza and stuff. If instead they could form some cooperation with the Palestinian misleaders in the PA who are completely corrupt and in league with Israel and willing to cooperate with the United States. So the other question is, of course, you can't just divide people by Jews and Palestinians, because Palestine is a capitalist society. The West Bank declares itself to be a capitalist society with a very small, wealthy ruling elite, just as Israel is, just as the United States is. And you can't connect the rulers of Palestine with the interests of ordinary Palestinians, be they in the West Bank or in Gaza. So you have to start talking about class-conscious unification. I agree that we shouldn't have identitarian politics, but I want to replace it with a different identity, an anti-capitalist class identity, which unites workers of all ethnicities and races, and religions all around the world. And that has to be the people that we're trying to unite with. And I really see very little possibility. If you had a united binational state, and it was run by the same people that are running Palestine now or that are running Israel now, that we have one state in the United States. It's divided by race, it's divided by class. One state is not what is necessary. It's one non-capitalist, anti-racist, multi-ethnic, egalitarian state, a socialist or a communist state. That's what's necessary for people to be liberated. And allies and the alliances have to be built between Palestinian workers, Israeli workers, American workers, and international workers of the world. I'll shut up now.
Thank you, and totally agree. It's actually part of the principles that we develop on the website of ODSI, where we go a bit more in depth. And it also, I think, connects very well with what Alain was saying, that there is a need to connect the depoliticization of identity in Palestine with the same fight in Europe, in North America. There is also a person, Christopher, who commented that that you want to start with union and local parties. I think it might go also in this direction. I don't know if you want to tell more about this. Is it something you've already done, or is it something you would like to do, and how?
Yeah, hi. So I've just put my, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, so what I've found certainly in the UK is the popular narrative is one that obviously Israel promotes and the Zionists promotes. It's echoed and reinforced, obviously, by the capitalist media. Many people that I try and talk to, and I introduce words to them and ideas like, I'll say something like, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Zionist, and then having the confidence, having the discussions that I've luckily had some correspondence with Alain that helped me to be a bit more confident in offering an alternative narrative. Now that's been really helpful, and I want to continue. But before I put myself in front of the local unions and the local Your Party organisation, which is a new political party in the UK, I certainly want to make sure that I have the extended vocabulary and the opportunity, having these opportunities to hear what everybody said today is enriching. It helps. And I'm so glad that people here, that we can talk and we can have slightly different ideas. Because again, that also is, how do we manage some of the conflict? The bigger issues about capitalism, it's interesting. I've written something recently that possibly Alan has seen on the WhatsApp, because I don't know how to use the blog on your website, was that, and it's interesting from the previous person that spoke, and she was saying about being anti-capitalist. I need to learn a little bit more, I think. Again, if I'm going to be talking to unions who are a workers' collective, if I'm going to be talking to university students, I don't want to misinform them, but I need a little bit more dialogue around, if we don't have capitalism, and I use the words of Rosa Luxemburg, who wrote that actually capitalism needs socialism and socialism needs capitalism, but what we don't need is this predatory capitalism, which has created these issues across the world, across the whole world. And every country has been involved in that kind of capitalism, and that's definitely what we don't know. We do not want. So this narrative and this discourse around how to take these messages to the unions and to the students of the local universities, I'm building my confidence up a little bit more. But yeah, I'm going to stop talking. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I don't know, Alain, if you want to react to this, and in general, like for people who want to engage and don't feel confident enough doing so.
Okay. So Christopher, when you speak of building the confidence, I have two things to say. First, it's not, I mean, it's very basic, you know, the concepts we discussed, that they're not complicated. We've spoken a number of times, you and and I think you grasp them. The second idea is that sure, you can, you're in touch with our coordinator there, with Leon, so you can even do this together. What I would say is just take the initiative. Like, you don't need permission, you don't need anything. Just go ahead and do your thing. When it comes to Ahmed, what you're saying about the PA, this is a longer discussion that we could have in private. But what I'd like to say is that there is no vacuum of power. So there is no such thing as just, dismantling the PA. In any societies, there are relations of power, and a relation of power is dismantled when another fills its place. It can be foreign, it can be capitalist, it can be identitarian, it can be anarchist, but a relation of power is replaced by another. So we don't focus on dismantling the PA, we focus on building an alternative. I don't know if you know our coordinator in the West Bank, Yasmin. So I can introduce you. But one of the things, for example, she was in discussions with the Palestinian Communist Party a while ago, and we were talking about this, yani dismantling the PA, and that was the point. What is the alternative structure then we can build? In terms of working under that occupation, the direct occupation and the proxy occupation of the PA. Much of it depends on your personal circumstances that, of course, I would know nothing about. In some areas, there is room, for example, for small students' work. In some areas, there aren't. So you would know better. But there's so much to do that you can do anonymously or even online. So again, that's something we can discuss together. And finally, to address the point that Ghada was discussing about dismantling Israel, that was the section 2 and section 3 of the presentation. So to dismantle Israel, we need to understand the network of power that sustains it, and we need to fight at those levels. And the 5 projects that I mentioned are projects aimed to dismantle Israel. So, for example, when we help Israelis leave Palestine, we are weakening the settler colony. So, again, the question is, what do we want to do in these projects, or other projects do we want to take part in?
Thanks, Alain. I think that Rada left. Otherwise, it would have been good to hear her feedback on this. There were also several comments before, but also in the chat about this question of Jewishness. I think, Larry, you're the one who said, like, instead of talking about separating Jews from action or not, it's better to talk about separating what it is to be Jewish. I think it's I like this framing. I having talked to, we did a lot of interviews with anti-Zionist Jews, and this is something that was always a core of what they were saying, that the Jewishness was the source of their anti-Zionism. So that would be, I think, a way, like a part of the narrative that could be pushed as part of this, like, not in our name, not because it's individual, but as what it means to be Jewish. So that was a quick reaction on this. Is there anyone else who would like to share something, share thoughts or experiences, questions?
I already spoke, but I'd like to speak to that question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I mean, unfortunately, when I spoke before, I neglected to repeat what I had put in the chat, which was the 2005 Palestinian call for BDS said the aim is to end international support for the settler colonial apartheid regime in order to end the regime. That was explicit, right? So, I mean, ODS is almost another way of saying, right, the end of that regime. And this aim has been increasingly embraced by more and more people who take part in the Palestine movement, especially by Jews. I mean, in Britain, we started the Jewish Bloc for Palestine in autumn 2003 to bring together the Jewish groups with very different politics of pro-Palestine politics, and increasingly, an anti-Zionist stance to abolish the regime, has become not universal, but now the prevalent view. Right? So that's a big change, and people explain how that change came through our understanding of being Jewish. Right? It's not yet a consensus, but it's moving in that direction. So that isn't really an obstacle, right? The Jewish identity is being explicitly reframed as anti-Zionist. As Naomi Klein put it a couple of years ago, Jews need liberation from Zionism, right? Not from institutionalized anti-Semitism, which hardly exists anymore in Western countries. Now, what that means in practice is under discussion, but that does strengthen explicitly the BDS campaign to abolish the settler colonial apartheid regime. The problem is that we don't know very well what more we can do to achieve that aim. We know that we need to develop stronger means to undermine our own government support for the regime. And in that regard, Palestine Action, that is the organization, has been by far the most effective, by destroying the infrastructure and sometimes the weapons of its systems. Thereby highlighting the complicity of Britain's own regime in the genocide and more generally in the Zionist colonization going back several decades. And that has also led people to think more clearly how we can be more effective, say, in divestment campaigns, which have expanded greatly in the last 2 or 3 years, demanding that local authorities divest from Israel. And all of this has really made the masks drop, the masks of the whole state structure, which sometimes claims to support Palestinian rights, but is institutionally deeply complicit in the settler colonial apartheid regime in many ways, economically and ideologically. So people are really having to undo their assumptions, their benign assumptions about the state in which we live. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And that's why fighting the narrative is also so important. Larry, do you want to go ahead?
Hello. I came in really late, so I'm not sure of all the topics that were discussed and were hit upon so far. But as far as Jewishness and what Judaism is and what Israel is, and how the words that people use to describe all of these entities, these different things, Israel is not a Jewish state. It is a state full of Jews. And yeah, it's a state full of men and women. It's a state full of the same kind of democracy that many of the other so-called great democracies are, which means no democracy. Yeah, the United States is a democracy that is not at all democratic. And the same is for most of the other states either. So one of the problems is the masses of people that live in these places, and it's almost impossible to do it properly with hundreds of millions of people or even tens of millions of people living in one group. I am an internationalist, so this whole thing with borders and with states is I think for all of us a sad story that we unfortunately have to deal with. But no, it's very often I point out parts of the prayer on Passover, and today also, Jews who pray are saying in the late morning prayer that because of our sins that we lost our land, that we were driven from our land, and we weren't driven from our land from the Romans directly. God sent them, but God allowed them to send us out. And this is a little bit, if you want to believe in God, you want to believe in Judaism at all, but still, the prayers themselves say it's because of our sins that we lost our land. It's something that we did that we lost the land. And our job now, as far as that goes, is correcting our behavior. And genocide and is not a good step. We are supposed to be waiting for the Messiah to tell us, which means basically God, to give us permission to maybe build some kind of Jewish thing in some place in the world. So supposedly the land of Israel, but we certainly can't do it now. It is against, it's like saying We don't need a Messiah. We don't need Jews. We don't
I
need God,
sorry,
and so on.
I'm just gonna cut you because we're going a bit off topic. And I wanted to check if somebody else would want to share something related to the talk that we're having about how to liberate Palestine, or if Alain, you wanted also to add some thoughts after the different conversations that we had.
I don't have anything in particular to add. I would repeat the same thing. We suggested 5 projects. They're just suggestions. There are other projects in mind. What I would say is, let's just carve out time from our schedules to dedicate it regularly to dismantling the colony.
Yes, I will join you and yes, sorry, I'm checking the chat at the same time. So we have coordinators in most of the countries, or at least regions. So if there is any of the projects that we've talked about, you can also reach out. I see that Anat, you're talking about universities, for instance. So same, Anna put the contact of our coordinator in Germany. So really, if you are inspired by any of this or want to share other thoughts, you can reach out. We have a general email on the website and on socials. And then we can put you in touch with the coordinator in our region. I would suggest, if there is no other comment or question, that we maybe stop here. Alain, do you want to share final words?
No.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending. It was a great conversation, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Alon, for the talk. Thank you. The presenter, I don't know what her name is, but thank you as well.
Thanks.